Here I am power brushing the blanks to remove all the scale from the forging. The scale forms because of the long permanence of the pieces at a specific temperature to make them soft. And here you can see the difference between the brushed piece at the top and the scaly at the bottom. Brushing the pieces is necessary because the scale is very porous and will tend to overly absorb the layout fluid, making it less visible. If you're not familiar with layout fluid, it is a dye which is specifically designed to be scratched for marking. It is heat resistant to a certain level, and it's also pretty durable, being able to resist minor scratches and such. Here I'm tracing the center line of the chisel, from which I'm going to extrapolate more precise line to help me draw up the shape at the grinder. I'm going to remove the bulk of the material with the angle grinder to save in belts and time. This is the smallest one of the 6 chisels, which is also the most difficult to refine. And here you can see I just took down the width. I haven't touched the thickness yet. At this point, I refine the shape and size on my dot grinder. I do the operation on all 4 sides using a 1, 2, 3 block for both squareness and to allow the neck of the chisel, which is thicker than the blade, to clear the work rest. With a more even thickness ground in, I can now use my high gauge to mark the center lines on all 4 sides of the chisel, and also a crosshair center, which is where the center of my lathe is going to support the pieces while turning. I set the compound of my lathe at 2 degrees, which is the taper that I want to use for the neck of the first 2 chisels. I then indicate the piece in the forger chuck, trying to get an accurate reading on the forged neck, which is a pain on its own. Once everything is indicated, I bring in the live center of my lathe to support the pieces while turning, and I start throwing the tangs so they are nicely aligned with the blade. Here I'm using a carbide brace tool from Harbor Freight, which works remarkably well for the price. And then I start tapering the tangs using a high-speed sealer tool with a different shape in order to better clear the shoulders of the blade. After taking the necks to a more desirable shape, I did a first test etch, and I can't really complain about the pattern. Looks pretty nice. I repeated the operation for the other 5 chisels as well, off camera of course, because I didn't want to bore you guys to death. And sausage thumbs up. At this point I start refining the shape of the shoulders of the blade, trying to create a better transition with the neck of the chisel. And here it is in all its symmetrical glory. After better cleaning up the blade, I do another test edge. Edges are kind of an addiction for bladesmiths who make pattern welded steel. And here you can see the line where the edge steel meets the Damascus. With shape and size all refined, I can now take better measurements and mark the lines with my high gauge where the side bevels are gonna be.
Working hard today?
Hardly working.
Oh. Guess it's better than nothing, right?
Yeah. And sometimes my neighbors pop in for a quick chat. I can't really complain though. I have really nice shop neighbors. And here you can see the reference lines where the side bevels are going to be. I also mark the minimum thickness of the edge. Here you can see the line. It's very faint to the camera, but it's there nonetheless. All the lines are marked on all 6 chisels, and we are ready to grind. I use a 10 inches wheel on my belt grinder because I like the look of hollow bevels on a chisel. At this point, the metal is really soft since it's not been heat treated yet, and that's why you don't see many sparks coming from the belt. And here you can see the first bevel. Look how good the hollow looks. Since this kind of Damascus looks at its best when it's deeply ground, I do another test etch to see how it looks. And I can't really complain, it looks pretty nice. And here you can see again where the edge steel meets the Damascus. And another sausage thumbs up. All 6 chisels are ground and looking good. And now one of my favorite parts of fabrication, which is file work. There is something extremely satisfying in removing hard steel with a sharp file. I repeat the operation all around the chisel, cleaning up all the transitions. And here you can see all the transitions are very smooth and clean. And here I use a slack belt on my grinder to remove the tool marks from my lathe, taking it to a higher grit so it's easier to polish it after heat treating. Here I do some normalization, which is a thermal cycle designed to refine the grain of the steel. I then quench the blades to give them the hardness required to hold an edge. Off camera I also temper them to give them the toughness required to hold an impact. Let's take care of some handles, shall we? This is some beautiful black wood that I got from Exotic Wood USA. I will put that description below. On which I am finding the center on both ends of the billet. And I'm using a combination square which has a center finder for both rounds and squares. And then I mark the newly found center with a scribe. It doesn't need to be too deep, it just so the drill bit doesn't wander around. And then I drill a little 1/8 hole, which is just the placement for the tip of the drive center. Then I take the drive center and I hammer it nice and tight against the end of the billet. I made this drive center to be used in the 3-jaw chuck of my lathe, which is definitely my favorite tool after the press. And I know a lot of you guys are gonna say, "What are you doing, Francesco? You're cutting wood on a metal lathe?" Shut up, this is my lathe. You can see how this freshly sharpened high-speed steel tool is leaving a pretty decent finish, and horrible shapes that are gonna destroy my lathe. Just kidding, they're not. There is gonna be some chatter due to the flexibility of this piece of blackwood. Nonetheless, the finish is quite remarkable. After thoroughly cleaning the lathe, since I could see some of you guys going to report me for machine abuse, I go to the grinder and I start grinding a taper in the tang of the chisel. I try to be as square as possible and as symmetrical as possible because I want the chisel to align properly with the handle no matter how I index it compared to the axis of the chisel. And there you go, nice and square and symmetrical and centered. Here you can see that one of the chisels has been mocked against a prototype handle, which I'm not going to use because the collet came out too thin. Nevertheless, it's noticeable how the tank needs to be thinned quite a bit, which I'm going to do with files, although I'm not gonna show it to you because it's boring and also because I forgot to film it. Therefore, you just gonna have to trust me. Now you'll also notice that the collet is conical, but the stainless steel pipe that I'm going to use to make the collars, it's a cylinder. So I made a monkey tool. What is a monkey tool, you asked? I'm glad you did. It is a handheld device which is used to form different shapes. In this case, it's going to be used to turn the cylindrical pipe into a cone to produce the collars. I know you're gonna say, but this monkey tool appears to have a straight cylindrical hole. And this is why I'm going to machine one of these two round bars into a conical punch to beat into submission this monkey tool. You can see I already machined a pilot shaft on the punch in order to maintain concentricity to the monkey tool while I beat the ever-living snot out of it. And just in case my Italian accent brought mayhem and confusion while I was trying to convey my ideas, here you can see as I machine the conical section connected to the pilot shaft. I understand, this looks as entertaining as watching paint dry. So I'm going to show you how I use my portable drill as a power feed. And there you go, here it is the finished punch, and this is how it will work. The pilot goes in and then it gets punched in. But let's go do it, shall we? The monkey tool is being brought to orangey, here it looks yellow because of the sensitivity of the camera, and then the punch is being hammered in. I apologize for the shakiness of the video, but my tripod is extremely flimsy. And the pilot shaft was just long enough so I could hammer it out from the beginning stages. I had to use my striking anvil on top of my actual anvil as a support because my actual anvil is extremely light. Fast forward 4 or 5 heats, the punch has been driven in the monkey tool the correct amount. And after this final pass, the monkey tool is ready to be cooled down and be used to subdue the stainless steel pipe into the correct shape. Since this metal pipe is quite thin, if I try to force it in the monkey tool from the beginning, the back part where it gets hammered on, it collapses and I lose a lot of material. Ask me how I know. And that's why I start by hand forging a taper and then using the monkey tool to finish up and correct the taper, making it repeatable. And finally, after having said the word monkey tool 7,500 times, here you can see it in use. I feel it should have been a drinking game. The pipe has finally been beaten into submission, and it has acquired the correct shape and size, and the whole process is completely repeatable. The punch is then used as a mandrel to turn the wide end of the collets on the lathe, tucked in with a little bit of super glue and a little tap to force it nice and tight against the mandrel. Here you can see how beating the ever-living snot out of the monkey tool had some effect on the pilot shaft of the punch, but it's not a big deal because the conical section of the mandrel is fairly concentric and is the part where the collet is being indexed right now. And I know I'm not using the correct tool, but I didn't have a left-hand tool with the correct clearance, so the front end of the collar will be turned later, but the back is nice and flat and square. The hull of the tank will be drilled in 3 different steps with 3 different size drills to mimic the taper of the tank. I'm only going to show you 2 steps because I don't want to bore you to death. Anyway, every single drill goes in a very specific depth in order to mimic the taper of the tank. The hole has been drilled undersized compared to the tang, so I can heat it up and burn it in the handle. And it takes a little bit with this little torch, but I don't want to heat it too much because I don't want to overchar the inside of the handle. And of course my shop neighbor decided to annoy the ever-living crap out of me and you, turning on and off his generator. And it's done. Now I'm going to mark the top part of the handle, so I'm sure that I will align it always correctly. And after I glued the collar on the handle, I faced all together, and now I'm giving some taper to the handle. And that's the handle roughed out. I also use a combination of rasp and file to blend in. And here I'm taking care of the back side of the handle as well. Look at those nasty wood chips. My lathe is gonna die. Spoiler alert, it won't. I'm making the handle somewhat barrel shape in order to be light and comfortable. I like using a rasp to blend the shapes and then following with a file and sandpaper. I know I shouldn't have used a glove. I won't do that mistake again, don't worry. Look how nicely it fits and aligns. Delicious. Now that everything is being wrapped out and everything fits together properly, I'm going to blend everything in on the slack belt of my grinder. All the chisels have been blended in and cleaned up. You can see that we're very near the completion of this project. Look how delicious they look. After blending in, I've been through the grits on my grinder to finish then with a nice coat of oil. Beautiful. I didn't show you the etching because we did it already 300 times in the previous episodes, but here they are in all their magnificence. There is also a little bit of chatoyancy that you can see, given by the depth of the edge. And at this point they're also sharpened. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and this series, and don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment if you'd like. I'll see you on the next one. Ciao, ciao!